A while back, I told Tim that I had a couple sermons I was working on and preparing, and this is none of those. The Lord led me just in a completely different direction, which was just awesome. And so it's just, I don't know. I'm really excited today. Whenever Tim and Jordan were like, "Oh, we're not going to be here, but it's okay, Michael's going to be here," I was like, "Oh, that's awesome!" A bunch of new people, and then people were saying, "Oh, there's not going to be a lot of people here today," but there's a lot of people here today. Thank you guys for being here today. And I'm reminded of a quote I heard from a sermon. Don't ever be discouraged. There's just no reason to be discouraged. Some of the greatest sermons in the world were preached to 6 people. And some of the greatest worship sets and things were led for just 1 or 2 or 6 people. And so thank you guys for being here today and just for an awesome, intimate time. And so, as I was praying about what I was going to share, I had these, what I thought were awesome messages worked up, and the Lord's like, "No, I want you to share your testimony." And I was like, "Okay, I can do that." And so we'll just kind of see how this goes. And so there's a lot there, but I am going to really center in and focus on one part. And so we're just going to see where the Lord takes us today. And so for the most of my life, I've lived in Kentucky, either in western or central Kentucky. I have 4 beautiful sisters. I'm married now. I have a beautiful wife, 1 son, and a second son due in December. I have 2 great parents, one of which is here today. Hi, Mom. Over there. And something that was really great. My parents, they wanted us to have a Christian education growing up, and so they decided to homeschool us, and that was a huge difference maker in my life, and I know that, and so thank you, Mom. And when I was young, I remember being at church, growing up. So I was born in '88, so growing up like in the '90s, everybody's at church all the times that the doors are open, you're in there, and we went to a pretty healthy body, and there was a lot of people there, and people were just happy to be there, and it was great. I was really involved in stuff. When I was 7, I walked down the aisle, but I didn't really fully understand what that meant. I was kind of doing it because my friends were doing it, and the pastor of the church knew that kind of at the time, and so they decided to counsel with me, meet with me, and my parents did as well. And when I was 8, I walked down the aisle again, and I gave my life to the Lord, and I was baptized shortly thereafter, and I really do believe I was genuinely converted at that point. The next few years, my teen years, are what I might call the Leviticus years of my life. So I knew Christ, but then I started focusing and growing in my knowledge of Him. And one of the great things about being homeschooled is we had Bible as a class, and so I learned a lot about Scripture. And I was also really involved in a program called Awana, and was pretty successful at it. Before I was like 17, I'd memorized like 2,000 scriptures and stuff like that. Like that's a lot of Bible in you. And I got awards for it and Awana bucks and stuff like that. So yeah, anyways. But somewhere in there, I really switched from loving to more judging, from like this relationship with Christ to more practicing this religion. And I really grew in my religion and my knowledge of the law. You can ask my wife. Our first year of marriage. I knew the do's and the don'ts of Christianity. And it was really simple for me. If I did these things, it meant I was a believer. And if I didn't do these things, then I wasn't a believer. So I just did not do those things that meant that I wouldn't be a believer. And so everything was really being based, in my mind, on my works, on what I was doing, and not on Christ. And so I was beginning to think that I was earning my salvation. I had salvation because of these works, and because I hadn't done anything wrong, like hadn't committed like the big sins of the church. And that's just really how deceitful our hearts are, if we think about it. How they twist something so pure and simple, and then they make it complicated and make you start working yourself to death to earn something that you don't have to. And so I was deceiving myself into thinking that because of my good works, I had salvation, and I had the faith of my parents, and they were strong believers and are strong believers, and I knew how to operate in their sets of rules, and I was building my faith upon what other people were expecting of me about more of these rules and everything here, and I knew how to behave so that people would think that I was a believer, and I just fit really nicely in this thing. And so one of my questions is, are you doing that today? Just to think about, like, are you building your faith upon the expectations of others instead of Christ? Or do you believe that your religion or good works will save you? Because at one point I did. But we see in Ephesians 2:8-9, for by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, not of works, so that no man may boast. I kind of forgot that last part for a few years in my life. Well, if you fast forward a few years, and there's a lot there, but I really want to get to this other part. I was recruited to swim on the JV team here at University of the Cumberlands. I found out about UC through a swim magazine, and felt really so much peace about being here. Like, it just felt right. It was back whenever the school only cost $19,000 instead of like $40,000, whatever it is now. So like, and I'm not even that old. That's just how much it's grown. Anyways, the school was far enough away from home yet close enough. And I was not a really great swimmer. And in fact, really one of the main reasons why I got decent at swimming is because of my sister. She kind of got recruited to swim for a USS team, and my dad's like, yeah, she can come if you take him too. And so I was like that guy. And so, well, when I got to UC, I very quickly found out that not everyone was a believer, and just because the school said it was like Christian did not mean that it was Christian. And even in my set of rules, I was like, there's a lot of rule breaking going on here, you know? But through that, the Lord really guided me, and He was faithful, and He protected me. But I was very ignorant. I was so ignorant to a lot of things, and very, very immature. And I was a punk. I'm going to tell some stories today. My mom doesn't know, but just to kind of describe my own arrogance and one of my punk stories. This is when they had insights. There was about this much left of orange juice in a gallon jug, and so, from a big family, I just picked it up and I drank it, and my teacher got so mad at me. It was like yelling at me in front of the class, and was like really upset, and was like telling me that I needed to go buy some orange juice. So I took a $20 bill out of my pocket and threw it in his face, and went and sat down. Yep, that guy. So I didn't even ask for change. I was just like, buy as much orange juice as you want, you know. So yeah, that was me. Well, I was invited to join the national team in their boot camp, or they called it Hell Week. And it was just a lot of running, squats, push-ups, pull-ups, just terrible two-a-days, just meanness, terribleness. And I did really well. I was pretty athletic, had been living on a farm, and so I could like do stuff like that. And swimmers are not known for their best land capabilities, and I'm not that coordinated on land either, but I was better than some. So anyways, I did well there. And so the coach, he asked me if I wanted to try out for the national team, and I was like, okay. And so I drowned for about the first 2 or 3 months. The girls were all lapping me. I was the slowest person there, just because like recruited for JV, had this opportunity, thought I'd take it. I'm eating bubbles all day long. Well, after a few weeks of practice and things like that, and doing two-a-days, which I'd never done before, and we had our inter squad, and I ended up beating the fastest breaststroker on the team, on the men's team. And the coach had recruited him from Canada, and he had another guy from Poland coming in, and I whooped him. And it was awesome. And so like at that moment, I became, and the coach decided not to redshirt me, but to just go ahead and move me up, and that I would compete that year. And so and that was awesome. And I remember my freshman year going before all these swim meets and stuff like that. I puked my guts out before every single one my freshman year. I was so nervous. I was just shaking, yeah. But I can also remember some really sweet moments my freshman year, just walking across the viaduct or being in Gallup Chapel and just really praising the Lord and just really hearing Him speak to me, and just us communing, us going back and forth, and just really great things. I was involved in some different ministries on campus and seeking a little bit of mentorship, and it was really, really good. I ended up going to nationals, made national cuts. I did really well. I had 5 or 6 national cuts, and I remember I made it back to finals in the 200 breaststroke and top 8, and I was so fixated. I was praying. I was like interceding that I'm standing before this block and I did not hear them blow the whistle, which is one really loud, or the starter say to get up on the blocks. And I'm just like standing there with my eyes closed praying, and I'm like singing "I'll Praise You in the Storm" by Casting Crowns. And like my team is like right here and they are screaming at me to like get up on the blocks, and the announcer has to be like, "Lane 8, please step on the block." And I was like, what? Like woke up out of that trance and like got up on the blocks. And anyways, I did really well there. And then my sophomore year, I did even better. Ended up taking the 6th fastest time. And so, and the Lord was just really blessing me and honoring me through that. I wasn't really ready for what followed. And I'll call these my Proverbs 7 years. Or if you know your scripture, or and you can throw some 5, 6, and 7 in there if you want. But I started dating a non-believer, and it wasn't for long before we were engaged in premarital sex. And now I knew that I'd broken a very serious law. That was one of the big 3 that you don't do in the Baptist. You don't have sex outside of marriage, you don't get tattoos, and you don't smoke cigarettes. And there might be some other ones in there, but that's what I remember as a kid. So now, all of a sudden, man, what I had built on, I was lost, completely lost. I didn't know grace. I never had to practice grace. I didn't think I was that bad, so I never needed grace before. And so I didn't believe that God could forgive me. In my mind, I knew that I was doomed. And I knew that my works and my ability to fulfill the law had failed me at that moment. And my worldview, everything just came crashing down. And so all of a sudden, this faith that I'd built on other people's expectations and upon my ability just fell. I was that foolish man that built my house, my faith upon the sand. I knew the rock. I could quote you all about the rock. I could point them out to you, do this and stuff like that, but I didn't really have or know the rock. I hadn't put my foundation over there. I had done it and built it on my ability. And I blamed a lot of people for that. I really did. I blamed the people I was in a relationship with. I blamed some of my team. I just blamed everybody else for that. I didn't want to accept responsibility for myself. A lot of times the people I was blaming, they weren't even believers. They didn't really have that same conviction. That feeling that I was having was the conviction of the Lord, but I didn't know how to handle it, and so I ended up twisting it. And so none of the things that I started doing, they were bringing me any joy in my life, but I was like, well, if I'm already doomed, we might as well just go all the way, Let's just do this. Like, if I'm doomed, I might as well live like I'm doomed, Might as well get the most out of life as I can right now. And that was my mindset for about 1.5 years, and that was really stupid. I ended up really hating myself, and like I said, I was blaming others, and I really started to exhibit rebellion and arrogance and pride and just this self-righteousness. Like, this stuff just started pouring out of me, and I didn't care. Like, I really didn't care. I thought about showing pictures, but I couldn't really find any that I had that were appropriate, just because, anyways, it's just like my arrogance, like me in that, just pouring out onto others. And there's plenty of witnesses, one in this room and others at other churches, that can tell you more about those years if you want to talk to them. So what did I do in this? I became a really good expert at cleaning the outside of my cup, if that makes sense. Whitewashing my tomb. Making myself look better on the outside so that others would think that I still had what I thought I had, but I didn't have. And I was dying on the inside. When Christ talks about that, man, I was so dead on the inside at this point. But there were people that were really close to me that saw right through it. I remember a teammate of mine. He was an atheist. He came from Canada. He was an awesome backstroker. One time he said to me, I thought Christians didn't have sex outside of marriage. This is what he said to me in the locker room, and I was floored. I had built up a witness for 2 years with this guy. And he knew that I was a believer. He knew what I stood for. And that my whitewashed tomb couldn't fool him with that. And I was lost. It was bad. That was a gut check. So I remember I was training really, really hard because I would practice more. I would do everything. I'd stay up late. I'd do all this stuff because I couldn't handle the guilt that I was putting on myself, the shame, the condemnation that I was pouring on myself. It wasn't coming from the Lord. He was convicting me. He was like begging me to come to him, but no, I wouldn't, because I wouldn't do it. I would not do it. I would not come to him. And so I would train really hard, stay up really late, so that way when my head hit the pillow, I fell asleep. I passed out because I did not want to lay there at night and think about my thoughts that I was having. And sometimes I would ask the Lord to forgive me. And I do believe that the Lord did forgive me because I would ask him. But I wasn't really doing it because I really wanted forgiveness. I was doing it because I really wanted to feel better about myself, if that makes sense. It wasn't out of love for him. It wasn't because I sinned against him. I really wanted to feel better about myself and my sin. And that's humanism. That is straight up humanism. That the end of all being is the happiness of man. I wanted to be happy. And so I wanted, the Lord forgive me so I can feel better about doing these things so I can be happy. How twisted is that? That's really messed up. And I was asking the Lord to make me something that would stand between him and I, if that makes sense. I wanted him to forgive me and kind of put me back in this position, but that's not where I needed to be. I really needed to feel the Lord's conviction over here, but I wanted to be right here. And I wanted to be something that was standing in between what the Lord was trying to do in my life. And I wasn't willing to yield to that. Ultimately, I wanted my sin and I wanted Jesus to. I wanted my pity party. I was claiming to have a relationship with him, yet actively choosing and pursuing things that went against him. In short, basically, I was a friend of the world. I was a lover of the world, but I wanted Jesus too. And Scripture tells us that if we're in love with the world, that means we're an enemy of God. And that's where I was at that moment. And this might be where you guys are. I don't know. Actively doing things that you know are wrong, that are going against the Lord's will. And being proud in it. And God is opposing you. And we see that in James 4:6. Talks about how the Lord opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Think about that. The Lord opposes. The Lord was set against me. You know what the Lord did to people in the Old Testament when he was opposed to them? I mean, that's what the Lord was doing to me. He was opposing me at everything. And we're going to see some of those consequences in a minute. Psalms 32, verse 8 and 9 says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. Do not be as the horse or the mule, which have no understanding, whose trappings include bit and bridle to hold them in check. Otherwise, they will not come near to you. And what that means is the Lord basically was having to put a bit and bridle on me because I would not come to him on my own. He was having to put that on me and was going to start to drag me because I wasn't going to come willingly. And this might be where you guys are today. The Lord is pleading with you, saying, hey, please come, please come, please come, please come. And you're like, no way, no way. He's going to put the bit and bridle on you. He's going to get you to where you need to be because he loves you. He loved me. So here comes my senior year. Man, I wasn't in good shape spiritually, and it really began to pour over into my emotional, mental, and physical health. I ended up going to the ER on Christmas. And I was really late for my senior trip back home. I was just so sick. I just became really, really physically sick. I ended up, after a training trip, going back, and this is right after classes have started. I mean, classes maybe have been going for a week or maybe 2 at the most. And I came down with a really high fever. I had a fever of 106. And I couldn't get it to go down. And my tonsils, they swelled up really tight, about like this. So I couldn't eat. And I tested positive and negative for mono down here at the local clinic. I don't know how that happened. Positive and negative for mono. And so the doctors, they basically were like, listen, dude, you need to go home to your primary care physician because we can't do anything with you. We have no idea what's wrong with you. And you're living in a dorm, so you need to get out of here. At this moment, looking back at this, God was tearing down my house. He was tearing it down. And I really needed to be weak so that way I could be molded. I remember calling my mom, and my mom was going to come and get me because I was in no state to drive. And that night before she was going to come get me, I remember telling the Lord I didn't want to live anymore. I was done. I was so done. I was done with it all. I was done with faking the stuff inside of me. Life was just empty and worthless. If that's what religion brought you, If that's what it was all about works, I was done. I didn't want any more of it because I had it all. And at that moment, I was team captain of the swim team. I was a double major. I had dated some really beautiful people. I was just, I don't know, I was popular. I had all of this stuff, but it was just worthless, absolutely worthless. So as I laid on my bed that night, I closed my eyes, and I really expected never to open my eyes again. I really wanted to die. That's how much I wanted to die. In a small way, in that confession to the Lord, just saying, take me. I don't care where I go. I don't care if I go to heaven or hell, just kill me. I'm done. That was a moment of surrender in my life, just a really brief moment of humility, admitting that I couldn't do it, that I was done. I give up. Well, a few minutes later, after I prayed that prayer and I'm laying there with my eyes closed, expecting to die, my phone rings, and it's my old youth minister that I hadn't spoken to in a couple years. Funny. I remember he told me he was praying for me and thinking about me and heard that I was sick. And when I got off the phone, I just remember thinking, all right, Lord, you have a sense of humor. Just really thinking, all right, Lord, you have a sense of humor. Well, I ended up going home, and they ran a whole bunch of tests on me. And at one point, they told me they thought I had cancer in my tonsils, so they cut them out and to run tests on them. Turns out I didn't. They still couldn't figure out what was wrong with me or why I was having such high fever. They were testing me for all kinds of different diseases. I used to have more track marks on my arms when they were taking as much blood from me as possible, sticking me with needles. I went from being about 185 pounds of muscle to 160 in a matter of about a week and a half, 2 weeks. I'm not doing too good. I was really too weak to do anything at our house other than lay on a mattress on our floor that we had moved in our den because I couldn't really walk upstairs really well. I watched a lot of Bonanza. I can remember that. But I picked up 2 books that were just kind of laying there on the floor. And the first one was a D-Now, a 12-week devotional from when I was in middle school. And this thing was so simple. It was so basic. It was literally like milk. When Paul talks about milk, that's what this was. It was milk. It was very something that I could understand, and it was starting to chip away at some of this religion, this law that I was exhibiting. And the second book I began to read was The Shack. Now, because I knew the law, I had 10,000 reasons to disagree with this book and to burn it and throw it away and stuff like that. But the Lord moves in mysterious ways. And he knew that I needed a major change of perspective. I needed a really big paradigm shift in my life in order to understand him differently. I needed to hear and see something new. I really needed to quit judging, and I needed to learn how to forgive. And that's an awesome book for those 2 things. Well, I was home for several weeks, and the morning of Sunday, February 7th, 2010, I remember, I don't remember anything about the worship service. I just remember a guy got up at the very end. I can't remember his name. But he said that they were going to start a revival. They were from Life Action, and they were going to start a revival that night. And he said, I know it's Super Bowl Sunday, but I really challenge all of you guys to come and show up, really be committed in this. Well, being the prideful Pharisee I was not about to let somebody out-church me. I was going to show up, No way he was going to put that challenge out there, and I wasn't going to rise to the occasion. So I went. I'm glad I went. I don't really even remember necessarily what the sermon was or what worship was about or anything like that, but I do remember they had this tool with them, and they called it the complete spiritual. And I had just been going through all kinds of physical examinations in my life, so when the guy said, have you ever had a complete physical? And I was like, yeah, I can identify with that. He's like, this is a complete spiritual of your spiritual life to kind of check to see where you are. And I'm like, okay. And he said, just challenge everybody, listen, do this throughout this week, because this was going to be a long revival. They were going to be there, and it was awesome. Life Action is just a really cool organization. I ask you guys to get involved with them or do whatever. Anyways, but so I decided to do this, and I decided, I was weak. I didn't have anything to do when I went home, so I was just going to sit there at the pew and do it then. And I decided that I had nothing to lose, that I might as well be honest. At this point in my life, I might as well be honest. I might as well drop the whole Pharisee act. I might as well quit painting the outside of my tomb, and I might as well really be honest. And so I started working through this thing right here, and going through it page after page, circling yes or no, or checking boxes, or writing down things, and just like going through it. And the Lord was just opening up my eyes over and over again, and just like showing things to me, and showing me who I really was, and what I was really like, and in the state that I was, and where my priorities were, and everything like that. And there was, after I saw that, I knew that I was wicked. And I started to confess and started to repent. And against my sin against the Lord mainly. And I didn't care who or what people perceived around me. I just laid out every single skeleton I had at the altar. I remember I had my best friend with me, and I was just pouring out stuff for a really long time, just letting it all out. Everything I'd done, boom, 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 no holding back. And I laid it down all at the cross of Christ. And so I have a question to ask. If I showed up late to preach today, and you guys were like, oh, why has it been late? And I said, well, I got hit by a semi truck on I-75 on the way here. But my car wasn't changed, or I wasn't changed. You guys wouldn't believe me, would you? Like, no, you didn't really get hit by a semi truck. Well, how much more powerful is the Lord than a semi truck? Anybody know? It's pretty powerful, right? Well, that night, the Lord hit me with a semi truck of grace. And then he put it in reverse and he hit me again. And there was nothing left of me. Or if you want it like in different terms, more recent stuff, like, or a hurricane. How powerful is a hurricane? You guys have seen what hurricanes can do. Or a wildfire, or an earthquake, or a tidal wave. And we sing about those things, about the Lord moving in our lives with those things. You know, we sing about like, oh, how he loves us. You know, that song, and just how we're a tree bent in the wind of this hurricane, and it's just changing, and that love is pouring out. Well, that's what happened to me. And you know it when it happens to you, because there's no doubt. Like I couldn't lie about being hit by a semi-truck if I really was hit by a semi-truck, because there would be a physical change. Something would have to change, and my life changed. Like there was no doubt that there was a change that took place in my life. And if you haven't experienced that, I ask you to beg for you to pray for that. Pray for that semi-truck of love or grace or whatever it is, that hurricane of that to hit you and knock you down. And let him put the pieces back together, and you won't recognize yourself. Man, that night Jesus changed me. I remember I tried to lift my hands to praise him like towards the end, but I was so physically weak. I could only do this for just a couple seconds. Just a couple seconds, I could only do this. And so it took all my strength to do it. And now I like to move around a lot in worship. You guys probably see me up here just doing whatever. But every single time, that is a reminder to me of how weak I was at that moment and when the Lord really changed me. And now I can hold my hands up in strength, but it's not my strength, it's his strength. And every single time I'm reminded of that. And sometimes I like to hold them up till they're burning, just so I can remember that feeling of when I could just barely hold them up right here. Man, God is great. And that night, light shined in the darkness in my life, and the darkness did not overcome it. I remember I made a covenant with the Lord. I told him it did not matter. Whatever he wanted me to do, I would do it. And I was serious. I said, I'll be a garbage truck man for the rest of my life if you want me to. I will not ever swim again. I won't go back to UC. I'll do missions. I'll do anything you want me to do. You just do it. I'm done. Whatever. Here you go. I'm done. In that moment, and this is really cool because we talked about this briefly at our small group on Tuesday night, and I kind of hinted at this, but it was just so beautiful. In that moment, I removed myself from the center of my life and acknowledged that God was the center and that I was a part of his story. It wasn't my story, it was his story. And I'm going to say that again. In that moment, I removed myself from the center of my life and I acknowledged that he is the center and that I was just a tiny part of his story. And so I'm going to say this next part because I know it's true for me. Some of you guys are wanting and asking for things. You want better health, you want different kids, you want better jobs, or you want more places to eat out, or a different basketball or football coach, or even a different government. But have you ever said, Lord, I will praise you even if I remain sick, or even if our government oppresses us, or even if Tennessee never scores a touchdown, or good. Defense doesn't count. Roll Tide. Or that was good, right? But think about this. Like once we put in our minds like God and ourselves in the proper place. Life doesn't become about us anymore. And it's not about our prayers and our requests and things like that. It's no longer humanistic. It's no longer about my happiness is the end of all being. And it's about him and it's about his story. And this is something that I have to do on a daily basis. And sometimes I do it well and sometimes I don't do it well at all. You know, my wife and I, we're thinking about maybe getting a different house because ours is getting a little bit smaller. And it's like, do I really want to do this for him, or am I wanting to fill my selfishness and just like thinking about all this, battling all this? Well, because the Lord is awesome, after that night, he immediately began a restoration process in my life. The very next day, I was called to ask if I would help lead a mission trip to New Orleans by BCM. Before, when I was in BCM, I was a small group leader, except I would be texting people and about hooking up with them later after I got done leading church. Yeah. Now, they're asking me to help lead this mission trip to New Orleans. And I said yes if I would be a student. Now, the reason why I had to say that is because I had missed over 3 weeks of school. Once you miss 21 days of a class, you are, well, not really 21 days. It's like, I don't even remember what it is, but essentially it's 3 weeks. You AF. You academically fail all your classes because they deem that you are not going to be able to academically succeed because you basically missed a month of school. Well, I had missed almost that much. 2 days later, there was a snowstorm, and I remember my mom telling me to get ready because we were going to go drive to Paducah. A lot of people had canceled their doctor's appointments, so we braved it in a little Camry, drove in the snow and the ice to go to the doctor. And they were like, we have no idea what was wrong with you, but you're better now. I'm like, okay. Also, you know, Psalms 32, when I kept silent about my sin, my body wasted away. Through my groaning all day long, for day and night your hand was heavy upon me, and my strength was drained away as a fever in the heat of summer. That was me. But now, you're better. So they cleared me to go back to school. I showed back up at UC it was a Thursday, the day I was going to AF all my Thursday classes, and then was able to go to school on Friday. And so I couldn't miss any more school because I had pushed it to the limit. Well, I was still team captain, and I still had my national cuts. And at this point, I was like ranked second in the nation. I was really wanting to get a national championship my freshman year, or my senior year. You know, that's what you're supposed to do, right? Well, I wasn't cleared to get in the pool again until 1 week before nationals, and that was like taper week, and it was like halfway through. And so I essentially kind of practiced for 3 days, and then I was like, I want to go to nationals. Like, you know, I've earned this, I want to do this. The first day in one of my events, I was ranked, you know, in the top 15. I didn't make it back to finals. I didn't do that good. Second day, an event, I was kind of ranked in the top 10. Didn't make the finals. Yeah, and then finally got to my last event, the one where I was ranked second in. I swam, and I just remember being like so exhausted when I was done. Like, and I got out of the pool, and I remember even before I did that, I was on my knees in front of the thousands of people on this block, just like praising the Lord, because like I knew that I should not be there physically. I mean, weeks before I could only do this for just a couple seconds. Now I'm competing at a national level, and I had lost 20 pounds of muscle. But the Lord is glorified in our weaknesses. And he really is. And he's made strong in them. And I remember my teammates and people in the crowd and my parents just praising the Lord for what he was doing in my life. And I had like a scraggly beard and long hair, and I was just like weak and like skinny. My teammates thought I'd gone to like Africa and caught like a virus or something and like come back. I mean, I did not look that good. I wasn't doing that good, but I made it back to finals. Crazy enough, I made it back to finals in that event. I didn't win a national championship, or I wasn't in the top 8. I don't know where I was, but I was somewhere in there. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But the Lord was really glorified in that. And it was awesome. And it was so evident that Christ was the one who was doing that God was doing that in me. And that it was not me. It was so neat just to watch the Lord put his glory on display. And people were baffled by it. They couldn't question it. You couldn't deny it. You couldn't deny what my story was. Well, when I was at Nationals, I had a couple of gen ed classes. Well, one of them was art history. It was just a gen ed. And the teacher, he AF'd me because to go to Nationals, I had to miss another week of school. So I'm missing like 4 weeks of school now, my senior year, double major and all this stuff like that. But so he was not on board with me going, so he AF'd me. And I didn't worry about it. And when I got back, the dean and the teacher, they talked and decided that based on how well I did on the midterm, he would let me back on the course. Well, myself and 2 other people made an A on that midterm. I wasn't even at class, you know. But once again, that wasn't me. That was Christ inside of me. That was God putting his faithfulness and his glory on display. And that meant that I could graduate on time. In fact, that semester where I had missed like 4 weeks of school, I didn't make up my last exam or test until the week before finals. It's a long time. And I made better grades in that tiny semester than I had 2 years prior. And you can see the difference that Jesus made in my studies, because he makes a difference in everything. Like, I literally have papers, I pulled them out the other day, and I was like showing my wife of like, this is before Christ, like C, B, C, B, C, B, C, B, D, you know, now going like, oh, A plus, and they just get better. I literally have those. Like, and my professors, they notice the difference too. I had a lot of wrongs to right and a lot of people to make amends with. I often joke that the Lord sent me back to UC for four more years after I completed my first 4, because I stayed. I ended up became a dorm residence hall director, and I ended up getting my master's in Christian studies and was there for an additional 4 years. And through that time, you know, oftentimes we want to get out of that place where we cause so much death and destruction and hurt and pain. But oftentimes we're called to go right back to it. You think about the different people in the Bible who are called to go back. They go to their hometown, and they're supposed to be a witness there. And at that point, UC was that town for me. And you know, Proverbs 16:7 says, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. And like all these people that I had wronged and offended and stuff like that, I begged and I sought forgiveness from them. And some granted it and others didn't. But I was able to do my part. And I made it up like with my professors and teachers and just these different men of God that were around me, and I sought them out and told them my story, and they immediately like accepted me and welcomed me. I remember when I came back after this, I was telling my story to some of the freshmen that were in my dorm, and they invited me to go to be in their prayer group. And these were a group of freshman guys that prayed every single night in their dorm room. Didn't matter what day it was, didn't matter what time it was. They always prayed, and they invited me to come in part of that. And that was so awesome. Like just coming back into this, and then like every night we've got this group of believers. We're praying for hours every night, and we did a lot of cutting up too. But man, we were really seeking the Lord, and that was awesome. And just the things that He was doing there. One of the main things that I learned at that night at the Life Action on February 7th was to say, God, I need you. God, I need you. Because in that's a moment of admitting that, one, I can't do it, and two, there's a higher power in that, and that I have a need for Him. And that's something that has stuck with me all my life, is like, you know, in parenting or in marriage, God, I need you. I cannot do this. My flesh cannot be a good, faithful, godly husband. I cannot be the type of parent that practices grace with my child. I just want to beat him, you know, like, God, I need you. Help me to love him. My story just doesn't end there, because, man, you need a bigger God the older you get. You need more of God. And lately I've just been through this amazing season of faithfulness. The Lord is like, listen, it's time for you to go. I need you to quit this job. He'd done that to me before. I did that, and I was so grateful for the season I spent at Springs of Life. I really learned so much, and I love those guys. And then the Lord was like, all right, it's time for you to do something different. And it's like, what? What am I supposed to do? You know? And so I was able to finish up a degree. And then it's like, okay, Lord, we got a baby coming. I don't have a job. I'm looking around at all these other places, and some things were really promising. But the Lord was using that process of going through these different steps, these different applications, these different interviews and stuff like that, to refine both my wife and I, to get us ready for this next season. And now, you know, at one point I was just like, Lord, listen, Your word says, how can a man know his ways when the Lord ordains his steps? And I was like, can you please just seriously ordain these steps for me? Like, I need you to have somebody just say, hey, do you want a job? And I was like, yes, I want a job. And then let that happen. Well, the next day after I prayed that prayer, that happened to me. So pretty neat. The Lord is just awesome. But he was kind of waiting to, that 12th hour when it's like, okay, things are getting real here, Lord. But just being faithful and seeking him and knowing that he is faithful in all that. And he took care of so many things before that I knew, like without a shadow of doubt. And my wife was like, sometimes be like, why aren't you worrying more? And I was just like, I know he's got us. Like, it doesn't make much sense. I have no idea what he's going to do, but he's got us. And just remaining faithful and true to what the Lord was doing because, I don't know, because his promises are true and he cannot lie. That's who he is. He can't lie. And so I'm going to hold him to what he says. And he expects to hold me to what I say too. But he's a little bit more gracious than I am. A lot more. And something that's really helped me through this was I didn't just want to know somebody who knew 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 the Lord. If that makes sense. I was not content, and I'm still not content with, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, Peter's version of the Lord. Or great preachers and ministers. You guys shouldn't be content with my story of the Lord because you can have that for yourself. Like, God is alive. He is real. And so don't just settle to live off of the experiences of other people. Like, get in there, man. The Lord is awesome. And man, he's alive and he can do great and awesome things. And he desires this full and lasting relationship that will utterly change your life. But you have to be willing and you have to desire that. And you have to hunger and you have to thirst for that. And so don't just be content with reading these books about other people's experiences. Don't. Not at all. I mean, those guys, they were journaling, writing down the story inspired by the Holy Spirit, but it's kind of like the same when you're journaling about what the Lord is doing in your life. Think about it. Think about it. I'm gonna read some song lyrics for you. It's by a song by Big Daddy Weave, and it's called "My Story." And this is so true. If I told you my story, you would hear hope that wouldn't let go. If I told you my story, you would hear love that never gave up. If I told you my story, you would hear life, but it wasn't mine. But if I should speak, let it be of him. Or of the grace that is greater than all my sin, of when justice was served and where mercy wins, of the kindness of Jesus that draws me in, to tell you of my stories to tell of him. If I told you my story, you would hear victory over the enemy. If I told you my story, you would hear freedom that was won for me. If I told you my story, you would hear life overcome the grave. If I should speak, then let it be of him. And that's just part of my story. Revelations 12:11 tells us that we will overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. There is so much freedom in doing this. And even thinking back and going over and replaying those things and being able to see now what the Lord was doing at those moments of my life, as opposed to 7 years ago when I was telling this, I didn't fully understand, but now I'm able to look at it from a different perspective. And so I challenge you guys. I know Tim has been challenging guys with discipleship and evangelism. It's about relationship. And to really get in there and start sharing your story. Man, start sharing that story because we have overcome by the blood of the Lamb. And so I put Pam to work this week, and she was willing to make a bunch of these. These are the complete spiritual. And so after church, if you want one, they'll be up here on the front, and you can get one. And it works if you're at a place of humility. Don't do it pridefully. Be open be open to what the Lord wants to do, because it doesn't just apply to salvation, but it applies to revival. Man, and we all need revival. We need revival. And we can't blame and point to other people and like, that person needs revival or this person needs Jesus, because like we're called to be Jesus. The temple veil was torn in two so that we could commune, that we are one, all right? That we can pour that out. And so if you're up for the challenge, don't take it lightly. Don't just blow through it. If it takes you a week to do it for a week or a month or a year, I don't know. But I challenge you to get alone and just like pray and like say, Lord, show me what you want me to see through this. Help me. And I also really love the lyrics of Casting Crowns. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now I see. I once was dead, but now I live. And that's just part of my story. And so let's pray. Father, you are good. Lord, your love, it reaches to the heavens. It is so vast we cannot fathom. Thank you for that love. And your faithfulness, it stretches to the sky. And your righteousness is like the mighty mountain, and your justice is like the ocean floor. And Lord, I pray that you would show those things to us, Lord. I pray that you would move as nature has moved and has destroyed, and we've done crazy things this year, Lord. I pray that you would move that way in our hearts and our souls, that you would not let us remain the same. Do not let us become stagnant. Set us free from our religion. Thank you for Christ who came to set us free from the law.